to agree to testify in the US?
I think it is spectacularly unlikely. And Peter Mandelson, although he hasn't commented recently, he's let the BBC know in a general sort of way that he thinks he's done nothing wrong in any criminal sense, as you indicated, Krupa. And he told the Times newspaper, I think it was last month, that he had no fresh information for Congress and that there is nothing they can tell them that they don't already know, and that he had no exposure to what he called the criminal operations of Jeffrey Epstein. So I think it's massively unlikely, but, who knows?
The letter sent to him by those two lawmakers has been shared quite widely. What did it say?
I think perhaps the easiest thing, Krupa, is I give you the key sentence, right? It says, it's clear you possessed extensive social and business ties to Jeffrey Epstein and hold critical information pertaining to our investigation of Epstein's operation, and therefore we want you to come and testify in some way or another. Look, it's certainly true, going back to your original group, that senior British politicians have said he should. I mean, for example, the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown and former Labour leader, he has said that Jeffrey Epstein should testify. He said the same thing, of course, about the former Prince Andrew. So there's no shortage of pressure, both sides of the Atlantic group. I just don't see at this point Peter Mandelson or for that matter, Prince Andrew, former Prince Andrew, heading to Washington.
And what about that pressure here from the British government, from authorities here, to have its own inquiry? Where are we with that?
Well, at the moment, there are two things going on, both of them potentially massively, massively damaging to the current Labour government and its leader, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, as if he wasn't in enough trouble already, Creeper. But anyway, so there's a criminal investigation, as you mentioned at the start, into whether in 2008, 2009, Peter Mandelson, who was then a very senior minister in the government, just in the aftermath of the financial crisis, was passing very sensitive information to Jeffrey Epstein, sharing government information. So that's investigation number one, being carried out by the police. And then this other investigation, more of a trawl, I suppose you'd call it, is that the government is committed to publishing everything, WhatsApp messages, text messages, anything involving Peter Mandelson and senior members of the government pretty much over the last several years. So, it could be hundreds of thousands, or certainly more than 100,000 messages. So, the potential for embarrassment and maybe worse is high.
And very, very briefly, Andrew Mountbatten, formerly Prince Andrew, you touched on it there. He's had a similar request, but he also hasn't responded, has he?
No, he hasn't, and he's pretty much been banished by his brother, the King, out of sight into an estate quite a way away from London, and that's where the royal family, and I sincerely hope he's going to remain, although actually, again, with Andrew,
banished to an
pressure
estate
from the royal family and from the government to testify.
Rob Watson, our UK political correspondent, bringing us up to speed.
Or are they just asking him nicely?
As ever, there is plenty on the BBC
doing something
News
to extradite him for crimes. Good to see you. How are you? Just listening to BBC News for a minute.
Service in the U.S. is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content. Engaging audiences, creating meaningful experiences, and fostering conversations. APM
Probably won't be live for very long.
With support from Bitwarden.
Good to hear you're
secure
good.
and autofill passwords across all accounts and devices for digital protection in the new year. Available at bitwarden.com.
Thanks for being here.
If you have a car you're ready to part with, have you thought about donating it to Colorado Public Radio? Car donations from listeners like you are a really important part of CPR's funding, and it's easy to do. Just fill out a form.
Nice to meet you if you're new to the live.
Soon your car will
I'm just listening to the news right now, but
fact-based news reporting account.
I usually talk about stuff.
Get started at cpr.org/support. And thanks.
It's 6:30 GMT. This is Weekend from the BBC World Service. Still to come, in Bangladesh, a party that's been in opposition for almost 2 decades has won a landslide election victory. But will it bring about change?
Congratulations,
and the
Bangladesh.
Oscar-nominated documentary that tells the story of a fatal neighborhood shooting in the United States. That's all here on Weekend with Krupa Badi.
BBC
There's
News
probably a
with
lot
Chris
more.
Sparrow. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to tell the Munich Security Conference that Europe is no longer Washington's top priority when he addresses the gathering later today. Mr. Rubio said ahead of the meeting the world had entered a new era and Europe had to adjust. A partial government shutdown has
When was
come into
Europe
effect
ever
in the
America's
United
top
States
priority?
as funding for the Department of Homeland Security has run out. Democrats refused to approve its budget amid outrage at the actions of immigration enforcement agents in Minnesota. The Canadian Prime Minister has told a vigil in Tumbler Ridge he cannot fill the silence in the homes of the 8 victims killed by a teenager on Tuesday. Mr. Carney told residents all Canada was grieving with them. There's extensive police activity in the US state of Arizona close to the home of Nancy Guthrie, the missing mother of a news anchor. Roads have been closed off and officers are reported to be actively following a lead. The
Good
US
luck.
Embassy in Colombia says Bogota has resumed spraying drug fields with a toxic chemical. The use of glyphosate was halted in 2015 because of concerns it caused cancers. Japan has released the captain of a Chinese fishing boat detained inside its exclusive economic zone. Local media said China had guaranteed payment of cash collateral. The head of the World Health Organization has described a planned US-funded hepatitis vaccine trial on newborns in Guinea-Bissau as unethical. The WHO said giving a proven life-saving intervention to some but not others could cause irreversible harm. Researchers in Scotland have concluded that a good kiss has more to do with the thoughts and emotions it stimulates than the physical act itself. They've concluded that the experience of kissing is shaped by the thoughts and emotional attitudes brought to it. BBC News.
Welcome back. You're listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service with Krupa Party. Thank you for being with us. It is time to introduce you to our guests for the rest of the programme. They are Daisy Fancourt, an award-winning scientist, also a professor of psychobiology and epidemiology at the University College London here in the UK, and Kenneth Roth, American attorney, writer and human rights activist. He's also a visiting professor at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs.
Hello.
He joins
Nice
us
to see you.
from New York. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
It's great to be here.
Daisy, it is your debut, so I'm going to start with you. Now, despite working in the sciences, you actually read music at Oxford University.
I did. I actually started off in the arts world and very much thought I would stick in that world, but I was also fascinated in science and medicine and actually decided to head down that form of training instead.
How did that transition come about then?
It came about from working in the NHS actually on clinical
Hello.
innovations programs and actually seeing how surprisingly often it was that it was the most creative programs, even arts-based programs, that were the ones that were really effective in addressing various challenges we were seeing in hospitals. But it was a time when I was working there about 15 years ago when we didn't really have all the evidence to fully understand why that was, and that became the thing I was passionate about exploring.
I know that you've written
What are you
countless
passionate about?
papers on your scientific studies and various works, but I want to learn more about how, I guess, a background in the arts has informed your work in the science, how it's empowered you possibly.
Well, science and arts are both about creativity and curiosity at the heart of it. And I think often coming to topics from different backgrounds can give you a slightly nuanced or alternative perspective on them, which I've really found quite exciting myself.
I was interested when I was reading your biography. You are said to specialise in research on social prescribing. Now, what is that exactly?
Social prescribing is whereby GPs can refer patients not just to drugs and therapies, but also to community activities, things like arts, nature, volunteering, as well as legal advice or help with benefits, for example. And
Hello.
It's actually a national programme in the UK. I direct the UK's National Centre for
Yay,
Social
thanks.
Prescribing Data and Analysis. And it actually also operates in 40 other countries around the world. So it's a major part of a number of health services.
So how GPs or general practitioners or doctors are using the arts to bring about some degree of healing, which is really interesting. Kenneth, let's bring you into our conversation. You started out in human rights as a volunteer.
I mean, that's correct. When I graduated from law school, there were no jobs in human rights. I ended up spending my career at Human Rights Watch, but when I left law school, there were 2 employees. And so I assumed I would never get a job. I worked as an attorney, mainly as a prosecutor in New York, and spent nights and weekends volunteering doing human rights work. And after doing that for 6 years, a job opened up at Human Rights Watch. I jumped at it, and I never left until 3.5 years ago. I ran the organization for 3 decades.
3 decades.
Snap
You
button's
must
good.
have seen, studied, observed so many abuses of human rights. I mean, where to start with that portfolio of events that you've witnessed?
Well, I mean, one thing that I learned is that even in dark periods, you get through them. That, life is cyclical. And so, I started off at the height of the Cold War when it seemed that, the Soviet bloc was just immutable. And a few years later, it crumbled. I lived through George W. Bush's war on terrorism, where, people talk about how terrible Trump is today, but there Bush was, disappearing people in secret CIA detention centers, torturing them, throwing them in Guantanamo. I mean, the U.S. was a major human rights violator, and we got through that. And so, I look at Trump today, and I'm spending a lot of time these days, speaking to groups and writing about Trump. And it's bad. I mean, he is trying to rip up international law in many respects, but we're already seeing a significant backlash. I think we're going to see the end of this era before too long.
And you've now crossed over into academia.
Hooray!
Yes, I mean, I'm doing that part-time. I've been teaching for the
End of
last 3
Trumpism
years
can't come
at
soon
Princeton,
enough.
and I have to say, I really enjoy it. I mean, there's incredible enthusiasm among young people. And at the same time, I'm writing. I published a book just a year ago, Righting Wrongs, describing how to put pressure on governments. That's what I'm teaching at Princeton. But I'm
Good.
also
I'm glad we stayed
going around
tuned.
the world and talking to audiences who want to know, what do we do about Gaza? What do we do about Ukraine? I mean, and I try to draw lessons from the book to explain, these are the strategies you can pursue to make things better. Even with Trump, he's susceptible to pressure. And so I'm spending a lot of my time
Not
doing
3
that.
more years.
Well, we are looking forward to learning more about you both and your
Not even
insights
3 more months,
across
hopefully.
the course of the program as we go through the big news stories of the day and indeed the week. And one of those, of course, has been in Bangladesh, in what's being seen as a huge change in fortunes. Tariq Rahman
I
is
am
to be the
curious
new
about
Prime
this.
Minister of Bangladesh after his centre-right Bangladesh Nationalist Party won enough seats to secure a majority in the general election. Mr. Rahman is considered the figurehead of the influential Zia family and spent 17 years in self-imposed exile in London. His mother, Khaleda Zia, was the first female Prime Minister of Bangladesh. These are the first polls since student-led protests in 2024 ousted the Prime Minister then, Sheikh Hasina, who denies ordering a crackdown in which 1,400 people were killed. Her party, the Awami League, was banned from taking part, and the Islamist party Jamaat took second place. Yesterday, Sheikh Hasina's son, Sajib Wazid, who is a senior member of the Awami League and lives in the US, spoke to NewsHour's Leila Nathu, and he gave us his reaction to those election results.
From the information I've received, it wasn't as smooth. But yes, people wanted to vote. People were frustrated with how bad things were in the last year and a half. There's been complete lawlessness, mob rule. This
I'm afraid
regime has
Epstein.
been, essentially a dictatorship. So I think a large number of people wanted to vote. But at the same time,
I'll
you
put it
had,
this way.
one of the
Who
lowest
cares about
turnouts,
Epstein anymore
in
anyway?
Bangladeshi
He's
elections.
swimming with
The
Osama
entire
now
process
around their
surrounding
private
the
island.
election seemed to pass off smoothly. There was little unrest. There was a hugely competitive field. Doesn't that show a complete rejection of the kind of politics that the Awami League promoted?
I don't think it was a competitive field because you've had the Awami League, which is the largest and oldest party, banned from the elections. You've had all progressive parties not officially banned, but they weren't allowed to campaign. They weren't allowed to really hold any rallies or events. No, it wasn't really competitive.
And I should stress that Sheikh Hasina is currently in India, and she has been sentenced to death for crimes against humanity over her crackdown on those student-led protests, which led to her ousting by Bangladesh.
She got
Let's get
sentenced to
more
death.
on the current situation now.
Take note,
and
Trump.
speak to Mahfouz Alam in Dhaka. He was a coordinator of the Liaison Committee of Students Against Discrimination, which was involved in
Chadaban
the
says the
2024
FBI admitted it
protests.
was
Thank you for
not
being
his
with us,
body
Mr.
taken out
Alam.
of the prison.
What do you make of these election results?
Yes, I think the election was participatory and competitive one. And the second one is BNP became victorious and with majority, two-third majority, which means in Bangladesh that they can change constitution and they can have like more say in policy, and they can have like policy decision and political decision um, taken on their own. So I think in this election, Awami League couldn't participate because of their role in
Okay.
2024 July uprising, because they killed like more than 1,000 people, students and young people and children. So they were barred from running for election. But other political forces, including their allies their allies like Jatiya Party and other parties, were active and they were campaigning for their own, and they didn't get that much vote because of their alliance with Awami League in last 17 years.
Yes, so those divides are clearly still there. What I'm keen to understand from you, Mahfouz, as someone who has liaised with the students who have taken part in these protests, and a young person yourself, what do young people think of this outcome? Are they happy with Tariq Rahman being the next leader of Bangladesh?
I think young people, we couldn't get the whole result or the data to whom young people vote, but yes, young people wanted a change and wanted to vote for after 17 years. There was a competitive and participatory election in 2008, and after that there was no election, and there was just one-sided election. BNP didn't participate in two elections. And I think young people for the first time, and my generation who were born after 1995 and onward, they have voted for the first time in Bangladesh. So yeah, they wanted change, and they wanted change through the political parties, but we didn't get the clear picture whom they vote. But they wanted change in policy. They wanted change in many things. Like I think for them, for us, the two-third majority is something which I think we should be apprehensive of. But again, there was Jamaat in opposition, and which young people, for many reasons, their historic role in 71, and for many reasons they don't like.
Yes,
So
I play chess sometimes.
there
No, I don't
was
want to split a
not that
two-bedroom
much
apartment.
alternative left for them to vote.
That's
So,
a really
yeah,
interesting analysis. Let me bring in Kenneth Roth, my guest here
That's okay.
on the weekend program. And Kenneth, Bangladesh is a country that Human Rights Watch has monitored closely over the years.
What do you think he
Okay,
would
that's
say to me?
correct. And I mean, the Awami League under Sheikh Hasina was a brutal autocratic government. And the student-led uprising
Make
was
content.
incredibly encouraging. It ousted an autocrat. In fact, in South Asia, it's, I think, one of the more encouraging places in the world today, because they did something similar in Sri Lanka with the Rajapaksa dynasty. So, this is an example to show that popular preference can actually oust an autocrat. I think what's disappointing, and I'm curious what the commentator was saying, is that the fact that now the BNP has won. I mean, traditionally, the BNP and the Awami League were the two major parties. They alternated power. And so while, this is change from Sheikh Hasina, it's not really change from history. The BNP has its own history of corruption and human rights violations. And so, I would imagine that many of the students are actually a bit disappointed by this end result.
Mahfouz, what do you make of that? Is this change enough?
Yes, about corruption and human rights violation, there is still it persists on people's mind who were there, the generation before us. Like for us, I think BNP has been out of power for 20 years exactly, and their leader, Madam Khaleda Zia, she was interned for more than eight years. So they got sympathy, and they could reinvent their image after 17 years of misrule of Sheikh Hasina. So Sheikh Hasina has made them, I think, invincible, made them something like people got sympathy. People had sympathy with them. and people thought Tariq Rahman as someone who is bereft of his brother and his mother, who were sort of mistreated by Sheikh Hasina's regime.
Right.
So I think it is all about sympathy. It is about memory that our generation don't have. But
That's a
obviously
really
they
interesting
have,
point, that it's about memory that your generation don't have. Alongside Kenneth, I also have Daisy Fancourt here with me in the studio. Come on in here, Daisy.
I'm really interested about this youth-led challenge that we're seeing, and Kenneth alluded to the fact that this is not the only country this is happening in. We're seeing youth political mobilization in a number of countries now, but they're not always being successful. I'm thinking, for example, about Uganda, where we're not seeing that same difference in outcome in the elections. And so I'm interested about what message this might be sending to other youth-led political movements and youth political activism that's happening around the world based on what's happened in Bangladesh.
What do you make of that, Mahfouz? Do you think people, or would you like to think that people outside of Bangladesh are looking at what's happened inside your country and thinking, we too can bring about change with the power
That's all right.
of
You
the
lost
youth
your
voice in our
parents. Your
country?
parents are still looking out for you, though.
So I think in Bangladesh it is different. Like in Sri Lanka, they have gained support after 1.5 years, and in Nepal there will be an election I think within months. So we will see. But in Bangladesh, 6 young leaders were elected from Jamaat and CP Alliance. But I think it is not what we aspired for. We thought that many young leaders would be elected and many young leaders would represent Bangladeshi people. But that didn't happen, and from very beginning, the establishment here who were defeated, but not only Sheikh Hasina played, but her establishment, her collaborators were there in Bangladesh, and they have made it difficult for students to grow as a political party. So
Okay.
they have only six member of parliament right now, but I think it could have been more like many like dozens of student leaders could have been elected.
So you would have
But it
liked to
didn't
have
happen.
seen students represented more at that political level. Very good to get your insights there. Mahfouz Alam for us in Dhaka. He was a coordinator of the liaison committee of Students Against Discrimination, which was involved in those 2024 protests, a turning point for the country. You're listening to Weekend on the BBC World Service. I'm Krupa Bhatti. It's a documentary tipped for big wins at both next Sunday's BAFTA and the Oscars next month. The Perfect Neighbor tells the story of the fatal shooting of a 35-year-old black woman named Ajika Owens from Florida by her neighbor, a 58-year-old white woman named Susan Lawrence. In its Netflix debut, it hit over 16 million views within the first 3 days alone. The film is largely made up of police body cam footage, interviews and 911 calls documenting both the shooting of Ajika and the events that led up to it after Lawrence had previously called the police over what she believed to be trespassing by Owens' children on her lawn on many occasions. She was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 24 years in prison in 2024. Well, I got a chance to speak to the director of that film, Geeta Gandhabir, in LA, and we also were joined by Pam Diaz, Ajika Owens' mother, who spoke to us from Florida. And I began by asking Geeta what the reaction has been like since its release.
For us, it was so incredible to see the response. We wanted people around the world to see it and to know Ajika's name. Ajika was a beautiful young woman with really big dreams, and she wanted to be a world-famous entrepreneur. And she used to say to Pam, one day the whole world is going to know my name. So for us, that was the legacy and the mission that we're left with.
Tell me why it was important for you to make this film.
Ajika Owens was a family friend. It was Pamela's beautiful daughter, a young mother of 4. She was my sister-in-law's best friend. Our job was to try to get this story out into the news because the news was not covering it, particularly on a national level. And we know here in the US, without media pressure, oftentimes cases like Ajika's go unresolved. There is no justice. And at the time, Susan was not arrested. So that was a deep concern of ours, particularly because of stand your ground laws in Florida. We were worried that she might walk away.
And Pam, your daughter, Ajika, we've been hearing about her there from Geeta, she was fatally shot just over 2 years ago. It's not been long, and I'm sure, no doubt, you are still in that process of healing, trying to understand, trying to process this utterly horrific tragedy, this utterly horrific killing. Why did you think it was important to make this documentary?
Initially, I was looking through the lens of a grieving grandmother and mother, but when I really watched it through a different perspective, I understood that Jessica's story needed to be shared in hopes of making real change to gun laws, such as Stand Your Ground, and just to bring overall awareness. And I had a responsibility and I had the ability to do so.
Geetha, we've mentioned Stand Your Ground a couple of times now. It would be helpful if you could just remind us what the law is.
Stand Your Ground laws exist in about 38 states in the US. The tenets vary state to state, but the basic principle is that if you feel your life is in imminent danger, you have the right to defend yourself without having the duty to retreat. And that makes this law incredibly dangerous because, as you can imagine, in a place, particularly like Florida, where the gun laws are incredibly lax, and that combined with Stand Your Ground laws and weaponized racism becomes really, really dangerous, particularly for people of color.
This production has come together through the use of police body cam footage.
So the question was, any director or author you want to talk to if possible? Shada Ben says George Lucas, Stephen King, and Harvey Weinstein.
Pamela's lawyers 2 months after Ajika was murdered.
Son of Thor said Woody Allen.
Files that we put together.
Nature Boy said Martin
we saw
Scorsese.
Something that we have never seen before with a crime of this nature was we saw what led up to it. We felt that the footage inadvertently and unintentionally humanized the community. Again, it's a multiracial community, and so often we as people of color are dehumanized after a terrible crime happens to us. And this footage was undeniable in that it showed the community as they were. I was not on the ground directing anyone. And oftentimes, if I had made a film myself, people might have said, oh, well, you directed them to do that, or you influenced this, or you made them say that. And it's impossible to use that argument.
Pam, turning to you, there is a specific scene that I'd like to talk to you about. It was one that moved me deeply. It was the moment when your grandchildren were told that their mother, Ajika, had died. This is likely, I would say, the most vulnerable that they may ever be.
911, what is the applicant? What is that? Come here. Come here.
It is an utterly raw scene. Why did you think it was important to show them in this condition, in this state?
I wanted it to be real and honest. As Geeta said there, we weren't directing. This shows the impact of what happens when a loved one is lost to gun violence. This shows the real, raw, true emotions. And people need to understand that this is the outcome. Families are hurt. Families are torn apart. And it's my hope that the emotion behind it, that will spark the viewers, our community, our lawmakers to actually act upon our issues surrounding gun violence.
It must have been incredibly difficult for you to watch back.
Yes, absolutely. Those are my grandchildren. I love them as they're my children. And to see them having to endure that type of pain, it's gut-wrenching. It's something that will stay with me for the rest of my life, as well as it will with them. But I just don't want it to stop there, to just be emotionally painful. It has to spark awareness. It has to spark action. It has to spark change.
Pam Diaz, Ajika Owen's mother and director of The Perfect Neighbor, Geeta Gambhir, speaking to me earlier about that film. Kenneth, I'll turn to you first. What do you make of using what happened in a small neighborhood to tell a wider story about a nation when it comes to gun laws, keeping in mind this incident specifically with Ajika Owens came about at a time before Mr. Trump took office?
I think this is a very powerful film for illustrating the danger, I mean, not only of the well-known gun culture in the United States due to the Second Amendment, but more specifically, these stand your ground laws that the filmmaker mentioned. And this is a very dangerous standard. And I think it's useful to look at it in light of, for example, the contrast between war and policing. In war, you're allowed to just shoot the other side combatants. You know, you have no duty to try to minimize any harm. But police have a very different standard. They can use lethal force only as a last resort to meet an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. The stand the ground law says, no, you don't have to minimize anything. If there's a presumption of danger, you can shoot. You don't have to retreat. You don't have to try to, minimize the use of lethal force. And so ordinary civilians with guns all over the place actually have a lesser duty to refrain from shooting than the police do. That's extraordinarily dangerous.
I'm interested in this though, because we've had this issue of gun laws being debated so much that it almost feels like now, by turning to the medium of documentary film, it's taking a completely different angle. It's now saying, well, if we tell this personal story, the raw emotions of this, is this actually going to be more effective than some of the debates that have been operating at higher sort of political levels? And I'm interested, Kenneth, in whether you think that this actually might be successful in achieving some change.
Well, I mean, I think it's very difficult to secure change with statistics. You need to look at individual stories. And here, from what I've seen of the film, the kids of the mother who was shot are, ordinary, lovely kids, playing in the front yard. And this woman who clearly is a bit unstable, the shooter, just, uses this one episode to kill the mother. And that's the kind of situation that people can empathize with and say, well, wait a minute, maybe these stand your ground laws are actually dangerous. Maybe we should reconsider this. So I think this is a powerful way to proceed.
And tapping into the work you do, using arts to send through a message that maybe previously people have struggled to hear.
It's actually a really effective way of doing that, because when we engage with art, even when it's art like this, which is showing real footage of things, we do actually help. It helps us to suspend our disbelief, which means that we're more receptive to new ideas, to new arguments, and also the emotions that come through art actually make
In Antarctica, you get to see the solar eclipse.
Were you surprised, Kenneth, that this has resonated so much with people there and indeed around the world?
Well, it's a powerful film. I mean, I haven't seen the whole film. I've seen trailers.
Yeah.
It is very well done. And, the fact that it's all live footage, it's all the police body cams.
What would you want to talk about?
Makes it so compelling because it's, it could have been a fictional story, but it's real life. Yeah. These are real people whose mother was just killed.
What I found interesting when I watched the movie was when it started, I was wondering, how am I going to get through almost 2 hours of just watching body cam footage? But oh my goodness, was it powerfully pieced together, and I was gripped, I was moved, and I was in tears. So yes, that movie, that documentary is on Netflix, and we will wait and see how it performs at those various film award ceremonies in the coming weeks. You're with Weekend.
This is CPR News, 90.1 FM, KCFR Denver, 1490 AM KCFC Boulder, on HD at 90.1 FM, and on your smart speaker, say play CPR News.
Thank you for supporting CPR. Every day, your membership is put to good work serving communities across our state. You ensure that news and music remain freely available to Coloradans everywhere. Your generosity helps make it all possible.
What's the most visited tourist destination in the state? Why was Colorado once known as the carnation capital of the world? Where does the 10 cents you pay for a grocery bag go? These are the kinds of questions curious Coloradans like you have asked, and we've answered every Monday with Colorado Wonders. I'm Allison Borden from the CPR Newsroom. Ask your question at cpr.org/Colorado Wonders.
BBC World Service, it's 7 hours GMT. This is Weekend with Krupal Bhatti. Coming up, our international correspondent Lise Doucette with a rare report from Tehran.
Are you hopeful that there'll be a deal between President Trump and Iran?
I think we really should agree because the future is really dangerous. Nobody knows if the United States is going to attack Iran.
Europe's relationship with the US is under the spotlight at the Munich Security Conference. The US Secretary of State takes to the stage today after this warning from the German Chancellor.
In the era of great power rivalry, even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone.
We'll go live to Munich. Also on weekend, the
Especially with
Slovenian
Putin
ski
destroying our
jumping
country.
siblings hoping for glory at the Winter Olympics. That's all here on Weekend.
Putin actively destroying America through Trump, through Danica Budinsky.
BBC News with Danielle Yawowiecka. The US Secretary of State is expected to say Europe is no longer Washington's top priority when he addresses the Munich Security Conference later today. Marco Rubio said ahead of the meeting the world had entered a new era and Europe had to adjust to that reality. Katja Adler is in Munich.
The Munich Security Conference is seen as a sort of annual litmus test of transatlantic relations. Over the past year, the Trump administration has slapped tariffs on Europeans and threatened the sovereignty of NATO ally Denmark over Greenland. So, the conference speech on Saturday morning in Munich by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who represents the White House here, is awaited with bated breath. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte told me he was confident the US was more committed than ever to the continent. Now Europeans were upping their defense spending. But the US has also been clear Europe is no longer a top priority.
A partial government shutdown has come into effect in the United States. Funding for the Department of Homeland Security has run out, and its employees will be furloughed or required to work without pay. Democrats refuse to approve its budget amid outrage at the actions of immigration agents in Minnesota. The Canadian Prime Minister has told a vigil
Sorry,
in
it's
Tumbler
about in
Ridge
Minnesota.
he
Good
cannot
luck.
fill the silence in the homes of the 8 people
Smiles
killed by
and
a
peace.
teenager on Tuesday. But Mark Carney told residents of the remote town they could be certain that all Canada was grieving with them. He spoke about the individual victims, says our North America correspondent Simi Jolasso.
He read out the names of all of the victims. He read out Takaria Lampert's name, a 12-year-old student at the school who he said loved K-pop demon hunters and crafts and cooking. He mentioned Zoe Benoit, who was 12 years old. Her family earlier in a statement called her vibrant and smart. He also mentioned Ezekiel Schofield, who was 13 years old. He said that Ezekiel was an aspiring hockey player who always had a smile.
There's extensive police activity in the US state of Arizona near the home of Nancy Guthrie, the missing mother of a news anchor. Roads are closed off and officers are reported to be actively following a lead. Earlier, the sheriff leading the search said that somebody had to know the identity of a masked man captured on doorbell footage. Manos also expressed hope that Mrs. Guthrie is still alive.
I don't have any reason to believe she's not alive. That question is asked of everyone, but for me,
Hi,
it's real
Romani.
simple. The
Nice to
family
see you again.
believes she's alive. I believe she's alive.
Hope she's
My
alive.
team, 400 officers out there right now, are working hard because they believe she's alive.
You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. Giselle Pellicot, the woman at the centre of the largest rape trial in French history, has told the BBC she was crushed by the horror of her ordeal, but that she's a survivor. 51 men, including Ms. Pellicot's husband, were convicted of rape, attempted rape and sexual assault at a trial in Avignon 2 years ago. For almost a decade, Ms. Pellicot was repeatedly drugged and raped by her then-husband, Dominique Pellicot, and others. The US Embassy in Colombia says Bogota has resumed spraying drug fields with a toxic chemical. The use of glyphosate was halted in 2015 because of concerns it caused cancers, but the Colombian authorities have agreed to resume using it following a meeting between Presidents Donald Trump and Gustavo Petro. The interim leader of Bangladesh, Mohammed Yunus, has congratulated Tariq Rahman, whose Bangladesh Nationalist Party won a landslide victory in Thursday's elections. Mr. Yunus is to hand power to the newly elected government after leading the country since a 2024 youth uprising overthrew the previous government. He said Mr. Rahman would help guide the country to stability. Scientists in Scotland have concluded that a good kiss has more to do with the emotions it stimulates than with the physical act itself. Ian McWilliam has more details on the study.
Researchers at Abertay University in the Scottish city of Dundee wanted to challenge the common belief that the physical act of kissing itself arouses sexual chemistry. They carried out an online survey questioning participants
How is that a
in Britain
common
and Italy
belief?
on their attitudes, experiences, and fantasies around kissing and intimacy. The results show that kissing is not a purely physical experience, but is significantly influenced by the thoughts and emotional attitudes brought to it. The study's co-author, Milena Rota, said the research gave fresh insight into how fantasy shapes romantic behavior, and their findings, she said, could assist in therapy for couples.
And that's the latest.
My
BBC
favorite author is
News.
L. Frank Baum, who wrote the Oz books. That's like Carl Sandburg a lot. I like a number of authors,
Hello,
but
it's
those are some of my
7:06
favorites.
GMT. This is Weekend Live here on the BBC World Service with Krupa Party. Thanks for being with us. A chance now to learn more about what our guests this morning are working on.
Okay.
They are Daisy
Well, that's good,
Fancourt,
'cause
an
we're gonna shut it
award-winning
off.
scientist, also a professor
Although,
of psychobiology
they're
and
interesting guests.
epidemiology at University College London, with me here in the studio, and Kenneth Roth, an American attorney, writer, and human rights activist, and a visiting professor at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs, joining us from New York. Daisy, I will start with you. You are busy writing. You've just finished a new book. Tell us more about it.
Yes, my new book came out a few weeks ago and it's called Art Cure, The Science of How the Arts Transform Our Health. It
Art
tells
Cure.
us all about the evidence which has been accumulating
I'm
for
good,
the last couple
yawning.
of decades about how engaging with music, dance,
good,
reading,
thanks.
going to cultural events has lifelong benefits for our mental health, helping
I
to
went to
reduce the risk of
Prismagic
developing
today.
problems
Check
like
out my
dementia
videos
and
from
also
Prismagic
depression.
from
It
today
also
and
has
Meow
benefits
Wolf
for the
from a year
medicine and
ago.
helping as an auxiliary
Some
treatment
really good
for a
videos on my
wide
channel
range of
right
different
now.
conditions.
And you offer a number of practical tips and suggestions to make the most of the arts, don't you?
Very much so. We all know the benefits of other health behaviours in our lives, like exercise and diet, and it's just as important that people are aware about what they can be doing day to day, engaging in the arts to support their own health outcomes. So it's full of all of those practical pieces of advice.
And what
I'm
do you
good,
say
I was
to
just
people
yawning.
like me who basically is I feel like I'm on a treadmill most days between family, work, and home.
Yeah,
And
go
I'm
enjoy
saying,
some
I
art,
just don't
make
have
some
the
art.
time to play
At
the
least
piano.
enjoy some
I
art.
don't
I
have
went to the
the
Free Art
time
Museum
to
Day
sit
the other day.
down
That was
and
great. Went to
sketch. What do you say
Prismagic
to
today.
people
That
like
was
me
awesome.
who you might say are making up
Prismagic
excuses?
closes tomorrow.
Well,
but
I think it comes down to priorities.
It's good to see
People
it one more
often do
time.
prioritise the arts because they think they're a luxury that's not so important. They need to prioritise
No,
the
hi,
other
Sticky.
important
You're
things.
good.
But actually, I'm arguing in Art
I
Cure
just
that it's
wasn't
the
talking
opposite.
over the
Art
radio.
needs to be really centralised. And there are simple ways like swapping things we already do, like scrolling our phones, for reading books, for example.
Guilty. Absolutely guilty. Kenneth, I'll turn to you. You're
Art's
also
good.
currently on a book tour of your book.
He sounds interesting
Righting
too.
Wrongs.
Righting Wrongs is his book.
Yes, no,
Sounds really good.
I issued it a year ago, and I've been on the book tour on and off ever since then. In fact, I was just in the last couple weeks in Denmark, in Pakistan, and I'm heading later today to New Zealand. So it's been fun, and I often feel that when I speak to groups, I'm engaged in this sort of political therapy because there's a lot of despair about the state of the world today. And my book really talks about how, every dictator, every tyrant still to some extent depends on public acquiescence, on public support. And so ordinary people actually have a very powerful tool at their
Dre.
disposal, which is the public sense of right and wrong. And if you can demonstrate that a dictator is serving himself, not the public,
Trump's
that
evil.
helps to generate pressure for change.
Donica Kuczynski's an evil, greedy bastard. Traitor.
From earlier in this program. And we see that
Happy Friday the 13th.
every government at some level is susceptible to this kind of pressure. And it's a matter of how can you mobilize it.
Gosh, it's
and
over
even
here.
the most powerful, even Xi Jinping, even Trump, even Putin are vulnerable when public pressure becomes strong enough.
And a lot of your
Yay,
writing
even
also
Trump, even
focuses
Putin, even
specifically
Xi
on Ukraine and
Jinping.
Russia,
Throw
doesn't it,
Netanyahu in
the
there and you got a
situations
deal.
there with human rights.
It does indeed. And
Yeah, happy Valentine's
I
Day.
think
It's Valentine's Day
we're
now
about to get
here.
into this when we get to the Munich Security Conference. But
May the goddess watch
what
over you
Putin is
too.
trying to do in Ukraine is not about NATO. It's not really about rebuilding the Soviet Union. It's about snuffing out Ukraine's democracy. Because, Ukraine represents
Trying to do that in America too.
a large Slavic Orthodox state right on Russia's border. It represents what Russia could be if it didn't have Putin in the Kremlin, if it didn't have this long-standing dictatorship. And that's terrifying for Putin. I mean, Putin goes to bed every night worried about a color revolution, about a popular uprising that would oust him the way the pro-Russian candidate, a decade ago was ousted in Ukraine. And he's determined to prevent that. That's what this war is about. I think Europe is right to see this as an attack on democracy, and it needs to be stopped in Ukraine, or the next step is Europe.
Thank you both for sharing those introductions to your books there.
Okay, I gotta shut it down there. That was really good. Sticky, let's make some music together. If you comment on my content so I can check out your channel, and then I'll see your music and put some lyrics with it.
Under the spotlight. It's the first major global event since President Donald Trump threatened Denmark's sovereignty with a pledge to annex Greenland.
Yeah, Harriet Tubman should be on the $20 bill. Biden kind of showed he was a traitor working for Trump. The fact that he never even put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, which was going to happen, but Trump stopped it in his first term.
Why both the United States and Europe still need each other as partners.
In the era of great
that's
power
interesting
rivalry,
too.
even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone.
It's 12-12, make a wish.
Is not only Europe's competitive advantage, it's also the United States' competitive advantage. So let's repair and revive transatlantic trust together. We, the Europeans, we are doing our part.
Mr. Merz also listed the ways in which policies of the US administration had broken with the values of Germans and other Europeans once believed they shared with America, including opposition to hate speech, the fight against climate change, and support for free trade.
All those things are against Trump.
To be a direct, albeit delayed, response to the surprise critique of Europe that the US Vice President J.D. Vance delivered last year at this very conference when he slammed Europe for its policies on migration and free speech. Also speaking
Politics,
in
magic,
yesterday was
spirituality.
the French President Macron, and he urged fellow leaders to reject the image of an aging, slow continent where freedom of speech is in retreat.
Europe has to learn to become a geopolitical power. It was not part of our DNA. We considered ourselves as a political construction to provide peace. We delivered. Second, a single market to provide growth and prosperity. We delivered. Now we have to reform it in this new order. In this new geopolitical environment, Europe has to become a geopolitical power.
Well, this year, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is leading
Witchcraft.
the American delegation, and he will take to the main stage later today in about an hour. But speaking ahead of the meeting, he said the world had entered a new era and Europe had to adjust. He would be direct in his discussions with America's European and NATO allies, he said.
I think they want honesty. They want to know where we're going, where we'd like to go with them. And I think it's at a defining moment. The world is changing very fast right in front of us. The old world is gone, and we live in a new era in geopolitics, and it's going to require...
Dude, the old world is not gone. You Nazis are not getting your fucking world you want.
Conversations in private with many of our allies, and they are our allies, and we need to continue to have those conversations.
Joining me now.
They are our allies. He had to say that. With our allies, they are our allies. Lying because he's working for Putin too.
Get your insights at the moment on what is happening there. We've got this conference taking place.
Okay, I'm gonna get going. Marco Rubio is such a tool.
I think he's going to offer a reasonably reassuring message to Europeans. This conference last year, as you might recall, was defined by this extraordinary speech by J.D. Vance, the Vice President, who verbally
Just don't
assaulted
support Trump.
Europeans
That's
on
the
free
curse.
speech, on human rights, on political freedom.
Supporting Trump is the curse, so don't support Trump. You'll be good.
I've heard
You're in Ghana, really?
the Pentagon's #3 official in the last couple of days,
Sweet dreams.
offering a message to Europeans that says you've got to take over security in Europe, but we'll do it in a sensible, orderly way. I think Rubio is not going to come here to insult Europeans like some of his other counterparts have done.
Hope you get better.
Yesterday, of course, we heard European leaders, Frederick Merz, Emmanuel Macron. We played a few clips there, making this robust defense of Europe. Do you think that's made the US concerned somewhat?
Just connect with the goddess. Jesus, if you want. The goddess.
It's what they
Earth.
want. Of course,
Be
there's different
anti-Trump.
visions of how Europe needs to stand up.
Trump's
There's a
the
sort of
Antichrist. So
British vision. We'll hear from
turn
Keir
to Jesus
Starmer
to
later, which
overcome
says
the
you need to
Trump
spend more.
curse.
There's the French vision that says you've got to be a geopolitical force, as you just heard in your clip. There's a German vision that says, the old order
I
is
lift
dead.
the curse from you,
But
Sticky.
fundamentally,
You'll
none
be
of
okay.
them really
Lift the
differ
curse
from
and
the
I give it
American
directly
aim,
to Trump
which
and
says
Putin and Netanyahu
Europe
and
has
Modi.
to take care of its own security, and America will still help with what their national defense strategy a few weeks ago called critical but limited resources. We heard an affirmation
Impeach,
of the
remove,
US nuclear
execute.
umbrella over Europe from the Pentagon this week,
Remove
saying we'll
all
still continue
Trump-Hooteniers
nuclear deterrence.
and
But
anyone who
ultimately,
protected them.
I think there's no
Might need a whole new
disagreement
Congress,
with
whole new
Europe that
Senate.
says you've got to do more, you've got to be more self-sufficient. I think all sides think that's a reasonable aim.
Let's bring in Kenneth
just
Ross and
stop
Daisy Van
war.
Course, my weekend guests, into our conversation. Kenneth, your thoughts or questions
I do want to hear
for
what Kenneth has to
Shashank in
say.
Munich there?
Well, I agree that Marco Rubio is likely to be much more conciliatory than J.D. Vance was last year.
J.D. Vance
J.D.
is
Vance, basically
mini
said the
fascist.
threat is not Russia. The threat is, Europe's suppression of the far right. And
He's
this
a Nazi.
was, not taken well. Marco Rubio, has been going to
We
the
need to
Munich
suppress the
Security
far right
Conference
here.
for years. He's a believer in NATO. He obviously doesn't always say these things now because he's Trump's Secretary of State. But I think
Check out my hashtags: Pillar Revolution, Peace Pipe Party, Church of Judas, Fairy Liberation Front.
Increase its military capacity so the U.S.
Grab 'em by the
has
posse.
to do less of that. Will Rubio be reassuring that Trump actually is there?
Pillar
for a Russian
Revolution,
attack, that
Fairy
the
Liberation
nuclear,
Front, Peace
defense
Pipe Party,
is a real defense rather than just
Church of
paper
Judas.
tiger. I think this, level of reassurance which Europe wants, it's just not clear to me that Rubio is even capable of providing, given whom he represents. And I'm curious what you think.
Jesus is
I
the
think
opposite
that's
of the
exactly right. I
Antichrist
think
Trump.
what's happened here is a loss of trust. Much more so than Vance's speech last year is Greenland. Greenland has broken trust, and that's what you hear from a lot of Europeans throughout this. Now, what I will say is that when I had talked about Bridge Colby, that Pentagon #3 official, he was asked about this, and he said, actually, too much reassurance is a bad thing. And he said, he compared it to a near-death experience where you change your diet because you've nearly died. And a lot of Europeans listening to that, have their eyebrows raised, their mouths open, saying, what did he just compare this to? But that's the point. They don't want to reassure us too much. They think that makes Europe lazy and feckless.
Well, we are certainly not getting that.
Why don't we all just get lazy together and have
US Secretary of
socialism
State is actually
worldwide?
expected to say Europe is no longer Washington's top priority when he addresses.
Europe was never
later in the
Washington's
day.
top
What do you make of that,
priority
Shashank?
under any administration
That
or
isn't
era.
surprising. Well, as Europeans, why would we expect that? Asia is the sort of
This is
center
the
of
weird
world
thing to say. We're
economic gravity.
downgrading
You've
our
got a huge
relationship
US
for
military built up in
Putin.
Iran, and of course the Western Hemisphere, South America, the Western Hemisphere is America's focus according to all its strategies. If Europe's litmus
cool.
test for America
Nice to meet you.
is, are we the #1 priority? I think that would be a really big mistake because those days are really gone.
No, just in the right.
We also noted that
It doesn't need to be a
Marco
right.
Rubio
It's just
cancelled a meeting
billionaires,
with leaders of
bootlickers.
European countries known as the Berlin format. That is where they specifically
Just a
talk
bunch of
about the war
slaves
in
serving
Ukraine.
Epstein class.
What do you make of that, Shashank? Did that surprise you in any way?
It does. It's a downgrading of Europe. There's no doubt about it. When I say reassurance, I should be clear. I don't mean
I'm in
America's
USA.
going to tell Europe it's #1. Not just the Berlin
Or Russia
process,
too
but
now.
also just days before this conference began in Brussels, NATO defense ministers met, as they do very regularly before this conference, except one, and that was, of course, Pete Hegseth, America's defense secretary, who didn't show up and sent a more junior official instead. So we are seeing in all of these
he had
steps,
something better to do than
America
Grindr.
clearly deprioritize Europe. I think here I stress again, for Europe,
Okay.
that's okay.
I'm gonna shut it down and
the
go.
point is not, are they deprioritizing Europe?
Nope.
It's, are
I'm
they going to
against
try and
Putin.
take another chunk out of Greenland? Are they going to then
I'm going to end
interfere in
Putin.
European
I'm going to end
politics by
Christianity.
fueling
That's the
far-right
Church of
parties
Judas.
in countries like Germany,
Church of
where I
Judas
am?
replaces all
That, I think, is the
patriarchy,
much
Christianity,
bigger
war,
question
and
for
Trumpism.
Europeans.
Check out the hashtag Church
Daisy
of
Van
Judas.
Court, come on in here.
When we're talking about the increasing pressure on Europe to increase its military spending, but it's important to recognise that many countries have already done this. Here in Britain, we've already announced substantial increases
Fuck
in
military and
spending,
war.
but this has had some mixed responses.
It's for
because actually
losers.
It's come at the
War is for
expense
losers.
of budgets that were available for foreign aid. And I'm
Exactly.
wondering whether this tension is playing out in other countries and being discussed at the conference.
You're right, but actually I think that
check out Church of Judas, replacing all patriarchy, Christianity, war, and Trumpism.
Appetite to support defense spending increases, and I think about here in Germany, which is a country, you don't associate always with very high defense spending. They were very low for a long time. But what happened? Well, this year, German defense spending is more than $120 billion. It's a huge increase. We're seeing massive rearmament. German spending is much more than the UK now. And of course, whilst 20% of the British defense budget goes on nuclear weapons and associated capabilities, all of the German budget is on conventional capabilities. So I think
people might actually use.
Move forward. If anything, I must say, the debate I'm seeing among governments is, are they moving fast enough? Because the NATO target of 3.5% of GDP is by 2035, whereas all the security forces and officials are saying we are much more concerned about Russian rearmament within the next 5 to 6 years, which is well short of that timeline.
Shashank Joshi, very good to get your expertise here on Weekend as ever, defense editor for The Economist, joining us live.